So last week I went through different categories of unhealthy ways that people deal with their pain. And I ended up saying this, that it's okay to share your pain and your feelings with God and with others when you're doing so in a safe and healthy environment. And I want to expand on that today and discuss adopting a healthy approach to dealing with your pain and emotions. And this is a two-part process. And the first part is right here, to step away from those coping mechanisms and to step away from all the lies. When it comes to talking about how you feel, the truth is that it is indeed okay to talk about your feelings with safe people who care enough about you that they're going to share the truth with you. It's the first step in stepping away from your coping mechanisms and the lies. Finding a safe place to talk about it, one where people care enough about you to share the truth with you. And unless you fully grasp this concept and you recognize it to be true, you're instead going to believe the lie that proclaims you're an outcast because of your situation in life. You'll instead believe the lie that many people choose to believe, that you're not supposed to talk about your pain and your feelings. And doing so forces you into pursuing a lifestyle where you do all you can to try to hide the truth of your pain. And the tragedy of such a lifestyle is that it only results in alienating you from the truth, from the pathway to healing and freedom, from others, and from God. Remember last week I said the worst thing you can do when you're in pain is isolate yourself. And you know, in the Hope Ministry, there's been countless times where I've experienced people who have bought into this lie. And oftentimes it's been to extremes. For example, I had a Hope member who literally came to our group for 3 months. 3 months before they uttered a single word. All because they were overwhelmed by the lie that you're not supposed to talk about your pain and your feelings. I also had someone who came to our group for several weeks in a row, but they stayed outside and they wouldn't ever come in, even though every week I invited them to do so. And then after a few weeks of doing this, I again invited them and asked them why they wouldn't come in, and up till then they had not said. But after a few weeks of this, they said they wouldn't come in because I'm mad at God, and I think it must be wrong to feel that way or to actually say that to anybody else. So I asked them, I said, tell you what, would you agree to let me just do a quick little experiment before we start? And then you can decide if you want to stay or not. And they said, all right. And they agreed to do it. So we walked in, and before the group started, I asked this question. How many of you are right now or have ever been mad at God? And just like we're doing now, everybody there raised their hand, including me. And then that person finally decided to join us, and they stayed from that point on. Again, believing the lie that you're not supposed to talk about it. And then, of course, there's Shrek, right? From the DreamWorks movie by his name, Shrek. When we first meet Shrek in the original movie, he had chosen to believe the lie that said he was nothing more than a smelly old ogre, right? And Shrek chose to live in a way where he alienated himself from everyone and everything to try to hide his pain. He kept it all to himself. But the truth of his pain starts to appear when Donkey shows up. Then the fun starts, right? Donkey, with what I'll call maybe his incessant barrage of questions and his endless and annoying dialogue, right? Donkey just never stops talking. He forces Shrek to talk about his pain, even though Shrek didn't want to. He forces Shrek to get it out in the open. So if you've seen this movie, I'm sure you'll remember the one part where Shrek tries to explain he has emotional layers like an onion. You remember when he says this? And Donkey quickly and relentlessly forces Shrek to see the truth about how he's wrapped himself so tightly in his layers that he's used them as a wall to keep everybody and everything out, including the truth. And then I'll give you a quote. Donkey says to Shrek at one point, "You're so," and you can say this like Eddie Murphy if you want to throw that in there, "You're so wrapped up in your layers, onion boy, that you're afraid of your own feelings." Remember when he says that? In essence, Donkey points out how Shrek has used his emotions and his pain to build a wall to keep everyone and everything out, including the truth. Shrek allowed his emotions and his pain to control his life in unhealthy ways. And here's the point of all this. Your emotions and your pain were not meant to be a wall of separation. They were meant to be a doorway to fellowship, community, and the truth. Your emotions and your pain were meant to be shared. And if you remember last week, I said the proof of that, I think, is in our eyes. Because I mentioned how when we cry, our tears fall down on the outside of our face instead of going through our sinuses where they would never be seen, because God designed us that way as a reminder for us to share our pain. Look at Ecclesiastes 3:7. It says this. It says that there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. So, when you're in pain, it is not a time to be silent. When you're in pain, it is a time to speak. Keeping silent, trying to hide it all inside, only make matters worse and ultimately lead to disaster. David learned this the hard way, I guess, because you read Psalm 32:3 where he wrote this, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long." That does not sound like an enjoyable existence. Psalm 39:2, he also wrote this, "But when I was silent and still, not even saying anything good, my anguish increased." There's David for you again. Or how about Jeremiah, where in 4:19 he wrote this, "Oh, my anguish, I writhe in pain. Oh, the agony of my heart. My heart pounds within me. I cannot keep silent." Elihu was a young man who was greatly troubled by the conversations between Job and his three friends that are recorded in Job chapters 3 to 31. And then rather than keep his feelings inside, Elihu answers Job and all his friends in Job 32:3 by saying this, "I must speak and find relief. I must open my lips and reply." And then in Mark 4:22, Jesus told us this, "For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open." Now, when he spoke these words, I believe Jesus was primarily referring to the good news about the kingdom of God. But in this statement, he's also teaching us a biblical principle about how to handle our emotional pain in a healthy manner. Pain was never meant to be concealed. It was meant to be shared. And this principle not only applies to our emotional pain, but also to the unhealthy and sinful ways that we try to cope with all that. In Proverbs 28:13, we read this: "He who conceals his sins does not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them finds mercy." And James 5:16 says this: "Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective." So, admitting your pain by opening up and sharing it is not a sign of weakness or illness. It's actually a sign of health and wholeness. Health and wholeness. That's not what most people think first, right off the bat, but that's the truth. Because it opens us up to access the one true source of help in overcoming our pain. And if we look at 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul writes this: "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me.'" So by learning the truth that it's okay to talk about our pain, we can find strength in the care, the support, and the encouragement that we can get from God. Psalm 68:19 says this: "Praise be to the Lord, to God our Savior, who daily bears our burdens." Well, this is encouraging because we learn from here that God's care and His compassion, it never takes a day off. It's there every day. He's always there when we need Him. But we can also find the strength in the care, the support, and the encouragement of others. If you look at 1 Thessalonians 5:11, it says this: "Therefore encourage one another and build each other up." How about Galatians 6:2? It says this: "Bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfill the law of Christ." And that's one of the, as I've told you before, that's one of the main reasons and did I go too far? That's all right. That's the one coming next. Did you not see the previous one? Is that it? Now you got it, son? Okay. That's the next one coming up. I gave you 2 for the price of 1 on that one. Where was I before my son so rudely interrupted me? I was saying that that's one of the main reasons that we in Hope are here. That's why we exist, to do those things, to bear one another's burdens. And then Ephesians 4:2, this one right here. See that, son? Okay. "Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love." So both here and with the ministry, we are here to create an environment where people can lower their walls of isolation, share their pain, and then allow God to transform them through that pain. Fact is, God intended for you to share your pain. No matter what lies you have learned previously in life, as I said, it's okay to share how you're hurting. It's a healthy and mature thing to do, and it is a positive step. What about the alternative? The alternative causes your emotions to remain trapped. And the results of this can be absolutely disastrous. Your emotional development can literally become arrested. And I want to illustrate this for you. Okay? Take a look here. The brain has 2 separate areas that deal with both feelings and emotions Uh-oh. What did I do, son? Oh, wait a minute. There it is. Never mind, I got it. That's me and technology for you right there. See that? All right. As you know, I hit the wrong button. I think that's what happened, son. Hey, look at that. Okay. See how that works when you hit the right button? Oh, what was I saying again before I so rudely interrupted myself?
2 areas of feeling.
Oh, thank you. I'm a mess some days. The brain has 2 separate areas. One that deals with feelings and emotions. That's called the amygdala. And one that deals with time and sequence. That's called the sensory cortex. And if you look here, so this is the front of the brain over there. This is our back. So the amygdala and the sensory cortex. Now looky here. In order for your emotions, your feelings to be appropriately handled, the sensory information gets, I did it again, here we go, this one, there we go, gets routed from the amygdala via the thalamus over to the sensory cortex, where it can be synchronized, made sense of, appropriately perceived, and resolved. So this is how it works in your brain, okay? From the amygdala via the thalamus over the sensory cortex in order to do all those things. However, if you don't take the initial step in opening up and talking about your feelings, they'll get stuck in time, because this connection right here gets blocked. So your emotions and feelings will get stuck in time. The result of that, your brain will not be able to properly handle and process those feelings. Before we go on, I want you to know there's going to be a test on all those names of the brains later, okay? So make sure you study. No, understanding the names of the brain is not what's important here. What's important by that little exercise is this. By not talking about your feelings and emotions and suppressing them, you're blocking that connection in those 2 areas of the brain. And as you can probably guess, blocking this connection can be very costly. I like to say, in essence, it's like trying to hold back the water from a fire hydrant with a garden hose. How many of you know that's not going to work, right? Because eventually, they ever seen when they open a fire hydrant, seen the kind of pressure that comes out of those? The pressure in there is going to explode that garden hose, causing it to erupt. And like I said last week, the same way, if your emotional pressure builds up like that, it's going to cause you to erupt. And that clearly points out, I would mention again, the principle that I brought up last week. What you don't work out constructively, you will act out destructively. Believing that it's better not to talk about your pain, trying to keep it all hidden, and allowing it to fuel any unhealthy coping mechanisms will have tragic consequences. So, like I said last week, again today, if that's you, you need to come to a place where it's time to start acting on the truth. And you need to recognize your need to do that in a safe and healthy environment. And let me encourage you with this. If you lived with that, you can still overcome it. You can still overcome it. You can still reverse all of that by opening up and talking about it. That's the first step in a safe and truthful place. But to do that, like I said, this first step we're talking about you have to step away from your coping mechanisms. In essence, you have to do this. You have to stop acting on the lies and start acting on the truth. In the lesson in hope this last week, actually, we went through a few things that I'm going to repeat for you here, because there's some other stops and starts that you need to do to go along with this. And the first one is to stop denying the pain and the problems. Stop denying all that. And here is a perfect example of that, folks. That cow really is not fine. To be set free from it, you have to stop denying it. The coping mechanisms that we all learn, they're actually intended to try to block our pain and block our fears, but they only lead to confusion and a clouding of the truth. And when you couple that with the damaging emotions that we brought up the other day, the things like anger, resentment, guilt, fear, anxiety, those types of things, it traps your life in the past and or the future while it controls your present. So you need to step away from all that, because you have to understand that positive, healthy change can only happen in the present. Can't happen yesterday, can't happen tomorrow. Only in the present. So the next thing you need to stop doing is stop playing God. Anybody have trouble with that one? Because as I'm looking at that, I'm thinking about all the trouble I have with that one. So here we need to remember that God is God and you are not. God is God and I am not. And because we're not God, guess what? We can't do His job. And remember, we talked about how God's the one who's in control of your life, not you. And like I said, when I brought this up the other day, I asked the question, if you were challenging whether or not you were in control in your life, I asked the question, if you really had control of your life, would you allow any of the pain to enter into it? Now, I sure know I wouldn't. I don't know anybody who would if they had a choice. And I brought that up just to emphasize, because it just shows how we don't have control of our lives. And the more you try to control something that's beyond your control, guess what happens? You run out of control. That's not a fun way to live, right? I think too many of us know that from experience. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus says this, "No one can serve themselves and God." Then you need to start doing something. You need to start admitting your helplessness. A lie would say that you can take care, I can take care, we can take care of things like this all by ourselves. I think I said that last week, the week before, when the kids start learning, I can do it myself, right? And I don't think that ever stops for a lot of us. But the truth is, we can't handle this by ourselves because we need God's help. And the sooner you admit that you need help, the sooner you quit trying to do things yourself, and then the sooner you can actually start receiving help. And folks, I know, and you probably know, that's not an easy thing to do. And guess what? God knew that too, which is why Jesus encouraged us in Matthew 19:26 with this. With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And then the last one is you have to start admitting that your situation is beyond your control, like we were just talking about. Because it's very freeing when you get to the point you actually admit that. Then when you get there, you're actually at a point where you're willing to turn it over to somebody else's control. And several times now I've talked about the whack-a-mole game. Remember that? The little moles just keep popping up. And the more you try to knock them down, the more they just keep popping up. And all that kind of lifestyle produces is the feeling of being overwhelmed. Because the fact is, the majority of things that go on in our life are beyond our control. And you simply cannot control what is beyond your control. So to step out of all of that, your coping mechanisms, etc., the lies, you need to stop trying to hide it, stop trying to cover it up, pretend it's not there, or whatever else you're doing. Stop denying there's a problem, stop denying the pain, and admit that what you've done so far hasn't worked. When you do things based on lies, they don't work. What you need to do, in essence, is get out and don't look back. There was a New York City fireman who ran into one of the Twin Towers when they were burning after the terrorist attack on 9/11. He was one of the fortunate ones who later came back out. And they asked him what he told people that he met inside the tower. And here's what he said. He said, "Get out and don't look back." Everything about your former lifestyle of dealing with this has kept you in a perilous situation too. And if you don't do something about it, just like unfortunately with the towers, it'll come crashing down too. So if that's you, today I believe this is what God has for you. Get out, don't look back. Then after you do that, it's time to take the second step in adopting a healthy approach to dealing with your pain. And it's this. If you're stepping away from that, then you got to be going somewhere. You need to be stepping toward God and what He has to offer. Now, when you talk about these two steps, guess what? The choice is up to you. You can choose to ignore God. You can turn Him down, but you'll continue to suffer for it. But I just like to ask and point out, if that's you, aren't you kind of tired of that? Haven't you had enough? And then the other question is, what do you have to lose? It's not like that previous lifestyle is anything worth hanging on to. So if that's you and you're ready, the wise choice is to step towards God and what He has to offer. The wise choice, take a step of faith towards God. And not only that, this is an important thing. This step of faith needs to be taken even if the feelings aren't there yet to accompany it. Because here it's important to remember that the Bible points out in 2 Corinthians 5:7, "For we live by faith and not by sight." And you could also say that this way, that we live by faith and not by feelings. And this is critical because when your feelings are based on lies, deception, pain, harmful emotions, etc., they do not equal the truth. Therefore, you need to take this step of faith, even if your feelings tell you otherwise. Now, here's the thing. When you do this, when you step away from all that and step towards God, how will He respond? This is important to know. How's He going to respond? And we're going to go through this in upcoming messages in some specific ways that He's going to respond. But what I want to do is start with this. I want to encourage you with what God's initial response will be to you taking a step toward Him. And to do that, I want to look at the story of the prodigal son. We can get that from Luke 15. And in this parable, if you remember, this is a fairly well-known parable, but in here, a man had 2 sons, and one of them demanded his inheritance early. So his father gave it to him, and he left home with it. And then he goes out and lives a life of, shall we say, irresponsibility and carelessness. And then he soon squanders everything that he had. And he gets to the point where the pigs that he was caring for were actually better off than him. They were eating better than he was. And then the son finally wakes up, realizes how wrong he was, and he decides to return home and ask his father for forgiveness. And here we'll pick it up in Luke 15, verse 20, and it says this. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. And I think this passage is a beautiful illustration of what God will do in response to you taking a step of faith toward Him. If you step toward God and accept His plan for your life, in His way and in His time, even before the feelings are there, even while you're still facing uncertainty and still facing the sights and sounds of your previous way of life, here's what God's going to do. He will run to you. Even while you're still a long way off and you still have a long way to go, God will run to you. He'll embrace you and He'll welcome you. But that's not all. Notice in this story, the father was watching for his son to come. Because as soon as he saw him, he was still a long way off. So he was watching and waiting for his son to come. Just like that. It's the same scenario, the same thing God is doing for you. And when you do, He will come through for you in many, many ways. We read in that story all the things He did for His son. Same thing God will do for you. Whatever your need, God will provide for it according to His plan for your life. He'll make a way where there seems to be no way. Let me just give you a rundown. God has promised that He'll heal you, deliver you, rescue you, save you, restore you, guide you, protect you, defend you, instruct you, counsel you, provide for you, forgive you, strengthen you, give you peace, fulfill His purpose for you, etc., etc., etc. And that's just to name only a few of the ways God will come through for you. And we're going to go through some of these specifically in future messages. Because the ways that God will come through for you are endless. Even if it requires a miracle. Because remember, that just happens to still be God's specialty. The fact of the matter is this. Nothing is beyond what God can and will do for you if you're obedient to Him and turn control of your life over to Him. So if this is something that you have never done, the wise choice would be to take a 2-part healthy step. Like I said, what do you have to lose? What is everything else you've tried done for you? Where's it gotten you, right? If you're ready, today can be a new beginning. Because your past and your present, those two things are not the deciders of your future. Jesus is the one who decides your future. The fact of the matter is, your best days can still be yet to come. If you do this, move away from your previous way of living and dealing with your pain and move towards God and what He offers. By getting out and not looking back, you can start living your life based on truth. And only then can life-transforming changes occur. That's what I'm trying to say. To do this, to leave behind ways that we've lived by can be very scary. I know that. If you've done it, you know it. And that's why I brought up last week this verse, and I'm going to bring it up again. Deuteronomy 31:8 says this: the Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And we will be here too. That's what we're here for, every step of the way. So let me finish with this one. Positive change can only occur in the present. So you have to stop living in the past and or stop dreading the future. That's the bottom line. And that's also where we're going to end for today, and we will pick it up from here next week.